Hello, everyone, and welcome to another round commentary for the US Open and US Open Invitationals on WGM Sabina Foisor. Very excited to be back here and thankful to US Chess for having me once again. I don't know, this has become one of my favorite tournaments of the year to comment on because we get talent all the way from very young to older, and that's basically what I love about chess. It doesn't matter what age you are at, you can play chess, you can create something beautiful for all of us to enjoy. So being a part of this is definitely something I look forward to every single day. Very thankful to Precision Tune Auto Care, who's celebrating over 45 years in business. They are sponsoring the stream for the entire tournament. Thank you to them. And without further ado, let's get into the action. When I finished off earlier today in round 2, I took off a bit earlier than usually. I did not do my typical recap, which I normally like to do. I gotta say, I felt a bit tired for the first time, which usually I don't. I just wanted to make sure I'm still bringing in as much good vibes as possible. And with my voice improving, I want to make sure I don't overstep on anything. So I want to start the stream tonight by reviewing what happened in round 2. Maybe that even will pan out better for many of you who are not here in the morning. You can catch up with some of my favorite moments from the round, and well, we can dive into the next round following through. So the first moment that I was quite interested in was this moment that happened in the game between International Master Stuart Rachels and Julio Morella. So this is quite an interesting end game. And earlier in the game, I tried to set up the position that I wanted, but I guess when I switched back and forth, the computer decided to change things around. But the moment that I'm looking for was actually over here. White actually had a really nice position, and I would say was pressing a bit. Then as pieces got traded off, the players got into this end game, and I think around here it was White's moment to save the game. So basically, it's a knight endgame with a pawn down, but White's active knight should make the difference to try to hold. And of course, White's king is a bit closer to the center than Black's king, which means if we are being careful, we should have the ability to hold. So after king d6, which was played in the game, White played the correct move, king f2. Had he played king d2, he would have fallen for this move d4 that totally restricts White's king from advancing. Then Black's king would come to d5, and Black would simply be winning. So instead of that, White played the correct king f2. Black responded with d4, and now king f3 attacking the knight, d3, trying to keep still White's king kind of restricted now. We're threatening d2, and you can't stop the pawn. So king e3 is the only move, but of course, White now is stuck with the king, cannot actually grab the pawn. So what to do? King c6, and it is in this position that White ended up making a big mistake, which cost him the game. He played the move knight to f3. Going back with the knight actually allowed Black to take the pawn, and then White doesn't have time to capture in d3 due to this move. Eventually that pawn will be lost too. It's not going to be super easy. Black still has to be careful with the technique not to allow White's knight to capture both pawns, but it shouldn't be very difficult to do so. Instead of the move knight to f3 in this position, the correct move would have been h4. The idea is we're escaping with a pawn from the attack, and we're waiting just one more move. The problem is for Black, they want to go king d5 and grab the pawn, but guess what? This actually loses because of a small tactical idea, which I hope all of you can take a moment and try to figure out. It's king takes f4, and after d2, knight e4 attacking the pawn. And of course, if you promote to a queen, you're going to all for this idea. If you choose to promote to another piece, say a knight, for example, still knight f6 check, chasing the king away from the attack of the pawn, and then white's plan is relatively easy to go king g5, grab the pawn, and push the h-pawn. So, and I think after this, maybe we can go potentially knight g4 first, again, protecting the pawn. We don't want to give black any kind of counterplay. With that pawn protected, this knight totally far away from protecting g6, white can actually win. That's why h4 is quite powerful, and black cannot afford to go for that. If black goes for the natural knight g2 check, of course we capture, 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 and then all white has to do is give up the knight for the pawn, getting the draw. So I found this quite instructive. This was board 1 in the Irwin. Definitely a moment that many of us want to be mindful about, especially getting into an endgame. At the end, we don't have much time. We need to be mindful about specific situations. Grandmaster Alexander Fishbein had relatively beautifully played game, outplaying his opponent step by step. This is, however, one of those other moments that I wanted to point out from board 3 in the Irwin section. So in this position, International Master Alexander Matros made the kind of mistake that I was surprised to see. Black is certainly putting a bit of pressure and trying to find a way to break through the position on the queen side. Being the higher rated player, of course, he wants to try to improve. But in this position, he rushed to play the move c4. Now this is unfortunately a big blunder because it weakens the knight in d4 and it allows white to capture in d5 after bishop takes bishop takes d4, and now white is simply up a pawn without any compensation to my knowledge. Luckily for him, his opponent missed that opportunity, played the move knight b4, which allowed the beautiful a5, and now black's pawns just start marching. And there was one more moment that I really was thinking could have happened, and I would have liked, that would be b4. Just simply keep pushing those knights away. But bishop c5 was played, which now kind of transposed a bit to b4, knight a4, bishop a7. And here white played this suspicious move, in my opinion, about what to do. It's really difficult. He played the move c3. But now black simply could have played b3. The kind of idea I would love to see, because here, after the move b takes a2, black is threatening promotion, but also capturing the pawn. If you go king c2, no, we don't promote to a queen. We're going to take first. No, we still don't promote to a queen. We promote actually to a knight to make sure it's checked, not to allow white to capture the knight. Rook takes, bishop takes, and once again, black is up a piece. The game, in the game, b3 was not played. Instead, knight c6 was played, which might have allowed white to survive a bit longer. However, white blundered relatively immediately here, and after bishop takes e3, takes the knights, one of the knights is going to be lost, and black went on to win the game soon after. In the game between International Master Timothy Taylor and Nicholas Anthony, actually, it was one of those games that I was quite surprised by how good things were going for white. Coming out of the Albin counter gambit, the players, the player with the white pieces, Nicholas, has played relatively well, getting a very nice position, in my opinion, bishop pair, and better development. I love the way this bishop is placed in b2, keeping the one in f8 not developing, and the next moves were relatively natural. However, in this moment, I was a bit surprised by white's decision to give up the exchange. Now, of course, when you have this kind of position and you notice there are a lot of pieces hanging, you really want to make something out of it. You really want to do your best to really create some beauty. However, white is missing something. White is missing one of their pieces in order for everything to be perfect. And that piece is the rook in h1. So that's the reason why, in my opinion here, white should simply castle. First, there's no need to rush with anything. Of course, the threat for black is knight d3, triple attack. So once we castle, we can go rook d1, stomp knight d3. The pawn in e6 is still there, still going to weak, doesn't go anywhere. The bishop in f8 won't be able to be developed. The g-pawn doesn't push. So I feel that taking things slowly, you know what they say, slowly wins the race, right? Sometimes. So this would have been my my approach to the position for white to give himself some chances. Unfortunately for him, Nichols decided to go for rook takes e5, which now gives black some chances, and it's not easy. I mean, yes, we try to get a pawn for the exchange. Maybe we get to find a way to grab more, but it was really not enough. I mean, maybe he thought he would have bishop d7 and he didn't. I'm not exactly sure. But looking back at the position, suddenly black has freed his rook, got rid of the bishop that never moved, and without super concrete play, white is eventually going to be outplayed in this position because this rook is still not in play, and eventually that ended up happening. Instead of taking the knight, obviously we might have wanted to move the bishop somewhere, but it's getting more difficult for white, and eventually he got outplayed. Going on to the next tournament, the Denker, which was one of those tournaments that we really want to be on the look for, because some of those teenagers, which are maybe not teenagers anymore, are getting to become some of the top players in the country. I remember a few years back, I would see the name of Liam. And I think I saw some pictures. He was this very young kid, very talented, excited about tactics. At least that's what I remember. And now I see him with a huge rating, definitely determined to win the whole thing. Now, in this game that he played against Advait Vijayakumar, actually, it was a very exciting knight endgame that I definitely wanted to bring your attention to. In this position, actually, after king g2, rook takes h2 was played, transposing to this knight endgame. That was specifically the moment I wanted to stop at. Knight c6, king e4, knight takes a7. And looking at this endgame, it's kind of interesting to see because evaluation-wise, it's really hard to tell what's going to happen. And with little time on the clock, you have to find the best moves. I was particularly impressed a few moves later when white found an only move in order to be able to save the game. So if we're playing through the moves for just a bit, of course, f5 to support the push of the majority, creating a pass pawn. White brings the knight very fast to make sure it's able to stop those pawns as soon as possible. King e3, and obviously after knight e2 was played, white has definitely calculated the follow-up, which was sacking the knight in f4. But guess what? You need to actually be super precise here, because if you're not, you will be losing. I remember at first time when I analyzed this, I thought the move would be b4, but guess what? b4 is actually losing for white. You want to create your counter chances, you want to push that pawn forward, but you really need to make sure you're considering your opponent's ideas. And b4 is losing, and let's see why. If you go b4 right now, black's gonna play this beautiful king g4. And you may say, well, no big deal, I'm just pushing the pawn. Yeah, a huge deal. Knight c4 stops your pawn, you go a4, and now this pawn pushes. And the cool thing about this situation is that, those pawns haven't advanced enough, and suddenly black is simply going to advance this one. It doesn't matter where you go, king g1, king h1, because eventually you'll get stuck there. This knight is coming right back to f2 to mate you, and there's nothing you can do about it. b6 we probably have to take first, and then we need to find our fastest route to mate. And I'm just going to choose that one because that was the first one I saw. Knight to f2, checkmate. So yes, we need to be careful. Going back to that original moment, stopping the opponent's idea is very important. It doesn't matter what kind of game, what kind of position you have, middle game, end game opening, just stop the opponent's idea. King h3, which white has found relatively fast. And now, because black is a bit pushed back, they don't have time to actually checkmate white. They managed to push them back, but by doing so, it allows white to advance those pawns just a bit more than black would have wanted. Knight b5, e6. Now we gotta go back. Those pawns have been, stopped for now, but black is able to kind of still advance, and this b5 move, giving the pawn back just to make sure that now king h2. So the idea that I noticed is we gotta put our king on the opposite color than the knight. This might be reminiscent of some other kind of position that you may be familiar with when there's a knight, but here, yes, we go king h2, and black does not have any way of improvement. King h2 again. So now it's on the back rank that we need to be careful where we put the king. King g1 is the correct move. If we go king h1, yes, it does matter, and white loses. King g3, king g1, check. You gotta go king h1, and now it is time for this knight to make its route to f2, and black wins. And the players tried it. Well, it was Liam that tried quite a bit of time to triangulate, move the knight around, to trick white to go on the wrong square, but Advait has held his game in check. Everything was fine, and the game eventually ended in a draw. Very impressive play by both players. Going on to the next board, actually, board 2 in the Denker. This was an interesting endgame that arose, and I felt it was the kind of position we want to be mindful about. So if we look at the way the endgame was played, we will see in retrospect what the correct way to draw would have been. But playing at the game, I'm not quite sure it's that easy for us to really come up with the correct move here for black. So, or at least the correct idea, because obviously after this last move of white's, which was king c6, white is trying to support the pawn to go to d7 and promote, and use the rook as a shield to cover the checks, and of course promote. And the idea is if you sack the rook for the pawn, then white may be in time to actually stop black's pass pawns, or pawn actually, because it should be just one. So what do you play basically here? Do you take the pawn, or do you play the move rook e6? Because rook e6 are obviously going to take the pawn. In the game, black ended up playing rook e6, but after king c7, he never quite got the chance to get the pass pawn the way he wants to. His idea probably with it was to bring the king to h4, grab the pawn in h3, or go to king h4, h5, g4, create a pass pawn, and then sack the rook for that pawn. But he didn't quite have the time for it, because now white's king is way too close, and after this move, check, the rook will check from h1, and white is simply winning. Now, a rook takes h3 was also a move that I suggested, but guess what? It's not the correct move either, because after d7, rook d5 is going to happen. Black doesn't get a chance to sack the rook for the pawn. So then, what is the correct move? The correct move is actually king to f7. And it's not an easy kind of move to make, considering that this pawn is right there about to promote. It doesn't seem that our king would stop it. Why would we go back? Well, that's the only way that that works. And we're also giving up this pawn, by the way, but it's fine because of the pawn in h7. After rook takes g5, black is able to play this move, king e6, and I think this is the key move, important move for black that saves the game, because now the king will be able to stop that pawn. There's rook d3, and white's placement of the rook does not allow it to actually save the game. So if you go d7, of course, we just simply check, trade, and grab the pawn, which is a very easy draw. If you attempt to go like, let's say, rook c5 to block things out, we can simply go rook d3 once again and grab the pawn. So king f7 was the important key move there in order to kind of save the game. Now let's look what happens after d7, threatening promotion. Now we simply go king to e7. With this move, once again, we're threatening to check and grab the pawn, and white does not have time for things like this. You can simply check, the king would go away somewhere, and then we can block the pawn. Once we have blocked it, we'll grab this one, we'll be back to take this, and the game would be a draw. So king f7, the beautiful and only correct way for black to actually save the game, which, you know, unfortunately was missed by Amog, and eventually the game was won by Evan. My other kind of critical moment, kind of game, and definitely one that a lot of eyes are on, was the one that was played between Ananya Wadwa against Megan Paragua. And the players played a relatively normal line in the QGD and then kind of transposed into a Catalan. And it is in this position that white had a very nice move that Ananya actually missed. The move was bishop to e3. And I wanted to stop and kind of review this moment because, you know, as we're looking at the position, obviously, black just played queen c7, trying to get the knight away from there and find a way to develop the bishop in c8, since black is behind with development. But the thing is that it's not so easy here to really develop for black. But this move would have made things even harder, because if you grab the knight, we simply play bishop takes e5, and with the bishop pair, black should have a very comfortable position, maybe e5, bishop b6, and of course you cannot grab the bishop. If you go back, bishop d6, we can trade, and knight to c4, followed by rooks on central files that are open, c and d. It's a very comfortable position for white. And missed that opportunity and got into a relatively balanced position. Both players were trading pieces, and it seemed that this game would finish without much fight after. However, if we play through a few moments later, it is Megan that overpressed and tried to win this pawn here in just a moment. After bishop b6, bishop d6, rook d2, she felt that it was necessary to grab the knight, take in e2, and activate the rook. But that was a huge mistake, which could have cost her the game. I think in this position, I was considering maybe rook back to e8 with an attempt to trade one of the rooks, bring the king towards the center, and I think that's basically what black should try to strive for in the position. But after this, check out what happened. Yeah, the bishop pair, I did mention that, Michael. Welcome, and yes. Rook takes d5. Rook c7, a very strong move by white. And now rook d7, putting some pressure on the 7th rank. White got the pawn back. The pawn in a5 is safe, and it is black's pawn in a6 that's the issue now. And it's not really easy for black to defend, and just a couple moves later, although, like I said, it's not easy for black. I mean, maybe playing some rook e8, rook e7 could be needed. It was very difficult for me to find something, but it is here that Megan played the move king h7, and that is a big blunder because it places her king on this pin. Besides the fact that g7 is weak, this pawn now is a target, and we had a discovery. So had Ananya played the move bishop d4, I think things could have gone definitely in her favor, because now the bishop is hanging, f6 is hanging, there's also rook d7 coming in, and it's not easy. White missed the opportunity and played rook d7, which allowed a bit of a defense. Now bishop d4, and here white played the move rook to d5. It's hard to say what is the best move, maybe, because I'm not sure how easy it is to make this decision, to trade the a pawn for the f pawn, but this could have still maintained some kind of pressure for white. Thinking maybe rook e7, bring the bishop back, try to bring the rook to attack this. But okay, I think this is a bit more difficult to win for white than the other one would have been. So after a few more moves here, Megan was able to actually get the small tactic after rook a7, immediately took in d4 and got into this rook endgame, which ended up being a draw. Even if black doesn't get the chance to place the pawns the usual way, there's no real way for white to improve, and the players agreed on a draw soon after. Another game that I was kind of impressed with a bit, like I like the tactical ideas behind, was this one between Rebecca Cortez and Sabrina Hoya, and it was around this moment in this close Sicilian that white played f5, and it seemed that things were gonna start being spicy. Black responded with g takes f5, which seemed fine, and now white didn't recapture, which would have been the normal potential approach. White ended up playing this move knight g5, which may have allowed the move knight g6. A nice defense for black, getting the knight to go away. What you will find funny or interesting in this position is the king in f8. It was the round where people actually moved their kings much more than they castled, relatively. But it was just a surprise to me to see that move being played instead of, castle. But you see, with the king in f8 instead of the rook, obviously f7 is an issue. And here black erred quite badly by pushing d5. This allowed for a beautiful tactical idea that came right after e takes f5, h6. White is definitely in position to create a sacrifice, and Rebecca found it very beautifully. Knight takes e6, pawn takes, and now f6. Not take the pawn, do not take it. There's no much follow-up after the king moves, but if you play f6 here, you're trapping the bishop, you'll get your piece back, and eventually things would go in white's favor. This was slightly better in the game. White actually played knight g4. It's not really a blunder, but it does give away a bit of the advantage. So, but eventually Rebecca did win. I really love the knight takes e6, so I had to make sure I showed that for you guys. Another tactical idea that I was actually surprised by that did not happen was in this moment. So here, after bishop c3, this is a relatively balanced position coming out of a semi-Slav. Here, black made the big mistake of moving the knight away from d5. That is a knight you don't want to touch. It blocks knight qp, and it keeps the bishop restricted. So knight b4 was played, and white missed a relatively easy move here. Can you guys find it? The correct move was queen to f5. With this move, white escapes with the queen from the attack, attacks the bishop in h5 and f7, and black does not quite have the time to defend anything. And let's not forget, because of this pin, bishop g6 will not be an option after capture. Bishop g6, queen takes g6, of course. So that bishop is trapped. Small tactic there, but eventually, even if the queen b3, Tanya has kept her calm, and eventually her opponent made another mistake, which was c5, allowing her to bring the final piece into the game, put pressure, and eventually win. But that is a small, not even tactic, small miss that you don't want to have. Lastly, there was one final moment that I wanted to show from this round, and this happened in the game between Lingxi Zhu and Jacob Wang in the Rockefeller tournament. So basically, like, this position should be definitely much better for white. They have more space, pressure on g7, I would say better placed pieces, but there's no opening, there's no file, there's no entrance, there's no way to improve. So obviously, in order to try to outplay your opponent in such positions, you need to find your optimal setup. You need to find the way to set up your pieces the best way possible, so that you really, when you make a sacrifice to break through, your pieces are really on their best possible squares, so that nothing happens, and then you are able to slowly improve from there. White rushed in this position with rook takes g7, because there is a potential threat here because of that pin. Bishop takes f5, which gives black still the ability to take there and grab the one more pawn, which white doesn't want to give. So before doing anything with rook takes g7, I believe a move like bishop d2 was recommended. Not the ideal kind, not the active kind you're thinking, but simply escape with the bishop from the attack, and then the sacrifice could happen next. In the game, white went for rook takes g7, which allowed black to recapture, and now have this extra move, bishop takes f5. Obviously, found by Jacob, takes, and white is still relatively active and has that super powerful pawn in f6, but it's not the end of the world, unless it is, unless you mess up. This is a tough position. This is really a tough position where you need to understand exactly what is white's threat, and you need to understand what your problem is and how you're going to stop it. This is the kind of position that a lot of us are struggling with, because we just don't know what is it that we're going to do. But basically here, white simply wants to move the rook away, maybe g7, h7, and then push the trade of the rook, promote. Easy. Or rook h7, take the pawn, go, two pass pawns. So in order for black to save himself, he needs to create activity. He does not have any kind of activity at the moment, right? I mean, look at the pieces, look at the rooks. This is the only active rook, but one rook alone is not going to change anything. So you need to create activity. Besides, we're dealing with rook versus bishop. When you're dealing with rook versus bishop, what's going on is that in order to show superiority of the rook versus the bishop, you need your rook to be active. If you're going to keep it back, the back rank, nothing is going to help you. So the correct move for black to save the game would have been either check first or rook e8, but check first, make white's king go away somewhere and then bring the other rook into the game. It was very important. This does not allow rook e7 either, and no matter where white moves the rook, black is going to be able to activate his rook h2, the attempt to do that. If you go b4, because you have to his mate, then we're checking you again, you go back somewhere, and then of course the rook will go back, or actually, sorry, not there, we'll go back here. I guess I didn't analyze this through fully. Maybe we check first. Still not. Oops. Oopsie daisy, I needed to find one more move and I missed it. Ouch. What is the move here? Activity, but show us the draw, Sabina. Do we have time for this? No. Should I rook f4? f7? Check. Maybe just this. Stop the pawn. No promotion for now. And I guess after rook h6, maybe black can consider taking. Or maybe this first. No, this allows rook. So maybe just takes. That doesn't save it. We need to find the draw. I wonder if there's some kind of perpetual here, but probably not. Check. Well, let's find it together, guys, because my analysis finished a bit too soon. See, that's the issue sometimes. You gotta keep going till the end. But this is definitely like the only way for black. After the game, you know, staying with the rook passive just simply allowed white to outplay his opponent. So that was a big issue. How can we create our counterplay? Something like this? No. Something like this, maybe, or simply king a7, and then, oh, I see. Check this out. If you're not careful, maybe black can go here, and to meet you. Yeah, something like that. And that would have been the relatively somewhat drawing mechanism for black to save the game. I mean, it's not easy, obviously. We analyze this. We have the bar. I don't have the engine, but I have the bar. And obviously I'm guided by it, so I don't make too many blunders. Or if I do, I immediately take it back, thankfully. But obviously that would not happen when you're playing. But you have to choose. I mean, between staying passive and kind of waiting for the opponent to outplay you and activating pieces, you should choose the activity, in my opinion. The game continued like this, so black did give a couple of checks, but now that the king came to e2, white defended all of his pawns, and now he's simply finding its way to support f pawn to promotion, and there's nothing that black can do at this point. Bishop e6, king d6 to protect e5, but now the king is just advancing, and black is not in time with his e-pawn. Look at that. Deflection, promotion, and white won. So this was my recap for round 2 of the Invitationals. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. It was a bit longer than I wanted, but those were the kind of moments that we want to be on the look for, and certainly hope you enjoy it.